It's Friday, and you know what that means. We're back, and we're talking about some kind of ridiculous nonsense that only I care about. So, we are full swing into the 2018/19 NFL season, and putting aside all the political kind of controversy and Colin Kaepernick and all the delicious memes that have come out of that stuff. It's a complicated question that has come up in various circles that I'm around, mostly because the people that I tend to run around with are rabid, I guess, NFL fans and sports team fans in general, and they love their sports. And so you spend a lot of time talking about plays, talking about players, talking about just stuff that happens. I mean, Sunday is one of the more kind of thought-provoking moments in cinematic history that I've seen in recent time is in the film Concussion. It's a phenomenon in this country, and it's not a new one. Fall is all about sports here in this country. With the MLB is getting into its playoff season, and basketball's just about ready to get started, and all this stuff. Like, it's all happening at once, and they love it. Americans drink this stuff up. So if there is an opportunity in modern American life for people to indulge in just blatant idolatry, just competitive sports is one of those primary ways for people to do so. In Romans, Paul writing says that, so they've rejected God. They refused to worship him. Instead, they started to put up the images of birds and people and lizards and creeping things and all this stuff in order to worship those instead. And you'll notice that every sports team, they're birds, they're animals, they're people, pirates or cowboys or whatever. Like, they're exactly that. And to say that it's not a religion almost, I think is a little bit naive. I think when we look at it, we try to dismiss it. We try to make excuses for it. But we know deep down in our heart, like, people are worshiping this. Grown men crying or experiencing euphoric joy because of what somebody whom they've never met and really have no hope of ever meeting did something on a grassy field in a town they probably don't even live in. So, that they'll have they'll have a bad day. They'll have an emotionally depressed afternoon because their fantasy team lost today, or their actual sports club didn't succeed. It seems ridiculous when we talk about it in those terms, but we all know that it's true. So what I want to talk about is, if Jesus was alive on the earth today, would Jesus sit down on Sunday morning Sunday afternoon, Monday night, Thursday night, would he be willing to sit down and watch the game with you? Number one, and I think like it seems like it would be pretty obvious, but I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we have about Jesus is that either he was effeminate, had perfectly curled or like dyed hair with highlights, and he would constantly cuddling small like woolly creatures all the time, and was speaking all nice and soft to people, but that's not true. He was a man's man. Before he started his ministry, he would have followed in the steps of his adoptive father, Joseph, as a carpenter, and he would have swung a hammer like him. He would have had calloused fingers. He would have probably hit his thumb a couple of times. He would have had, he would have been familiar with dirt. He would have had grime under his fingernails. Like, he would have known what it's like to do man's work, to sweat. Like, he did, like, that, he was part of that life. And he was part of our lives in that same way. Being a man's man, he knew not only how to do work, but he knew how to play as well. He knew how to play. What do I mean by that? His first miracle described in the book of John, chapter 2, is him being at a wedding and making wine for it. He wasn't sitting there twiddling his thumbs or wringing his hands like, these people are getting drunk around me, I'm uncomfortable, oh no, don't let me touch this stuff. Because the people who did do that kind of stuff were called Pharisees. And when he did do miracles, like on the Sabbath, he tells a man to get up take up his bed and walk. Pharisees see the guy carrying his bed and walking around, and they're like, stop doing that. That breaks the law of the Sabbath. And they're like, I haven't walked in 38 years, and you're going to get mad at me for carrying this bed around that I've been a slave to for more than 3 decades, almost 4 decades? It seems absurd that somebody who's supposed to be religious would be that contemptful for somebody who had just experienced the greatest moment of their life, but they were. However, Jesus was like, listen, do you want this? Get up and walk. You don't have to wait for that water to stir. I'm here. Like, Jesus knew how to make a person's day. He knew how to celebrate with a person. He knew how to make a party hot. He was not afraid of that stuff. He went to parties with people that none of us would go to parties with. Prostitutes, tax collectors, which would have been like mafia enforcers and stuff. Like, he knew how to get down with a crowd. But he also, on the other half of that, he knew how to enjoy himself in public without getting out of hand. He knew how to celebrate without sliding into sin. So that's definitely a delicate balance that we as human beings really struggle with in a lot of ways. He's a brilliant, beautiful example for that for us. The second thing we need to think about is that sports are not new, and that the Bible actually does acknowledge the existence of these things. Paul uses the metaphor of a person who fights, and he uses the metaphor, the illustration of a person who runs, because he would have known what it looks like to see somebody run. Back in the Roman Empire, they had the Colosseum, one of the more famous buildings in history. They would have big games. Like, the gladiators are famous historically for that. They would go out, they would put on a show for people, and they did it a lot harder than we do, in that it was a fight. It was a literal fight, people spilling blood on purpose. The UFC doesn't have anything on them, so they knew how to go hard. And they had the chariot races, and they had the They did this stuff. They did this stuff even back then, and they were excited about it the same way that we are. Gladiators used to be able to sell little vials of their sweat to their fans. Like, none of this is new. This might be new or might be novel for us because we don't have a historical, kind of a chronologically snobberistic way of looking everything, like that we're always the center of history and whatever, but we're not new. So Jesus probably would have been at least familiar with the idea of races and competition. Let's talk about why kind of the argument against. Why would Jesus not go? Just hypothetically. Why would Jesus not go to a football game? Why would he not sit down on the couch with you on Sunday morning and watch a football game? Number one argument against: idolatry. As I kind of mentioned earlier, this is just a breeding patch for people who want to idolize something, put it in the place of God, to have their emotions and their daily value, their personal worth stored up in something that's not Jesus Christ, crucified, risen on the third day for them. Sports is one of those things. Why is that? Because especially for athletes that are on the field now, people that are coaching, if their kids are involved with it, it's very easy to let that thing dictate what your schedule is, more than allowing worship of God. And not just, just Sunday morning worship. I mean, worshiping God, living in a worshipful attitude in life. We all have seen those experiences where crazy soccer moms going off on the ref because something happened out on the field, or that sports dad's going hard after immature, right? Like, those things do happen. I think that's one of the clearest signs that idolatry is taking place here. So that's number one. Number two reason is the things that tend to follow along with it. Alcoholism. Just people getting drunk, getting violent, obviously the objectification of women with the cheerleaders and stuff, the objectification of women in the advertising, just stuff like that, where it's clearly like we are not exalting the image of God in people, or we are allowing these, because Jesus said, the Bible does say, do not be drunk with wine, but instead be full of the Spirit. So if you are using the Patriots playing on Sunday morning as an excuse to get sloshed and hit on your sister-in-law, or whatever kind of absurd things that are going on, like, you're wrong. You're just wrong. You are absolutely sinful, and you need to knock that off. I think number three reason is that we need to make the best use of our time here. So, not to say that a sporting event isn't a good opportunity. Like, some of the best experiences kids have is with dad going to Fenway, catching a foul ball. And I think that opportunity from parent-child or sibling bonding, or community bonding between people who are part of a small group, like, we're all going to go to this thing together, or we're going to sit on Monday night, we're going to watch this thing together. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that could actually be a really good thing for people, to build that into them, where we are human beings and we love other things besides just going to our 9 to 5 and stuff. Like, we do enjoy each other as well. It's okay to do that. It's okay to be together in this context. So, but is that the best use? And if you're not even willing to ask that question, you need to refer back to number one. There's some idolatry happening. So on the opposite side, we saw the heads. Let's see the tail side of this coin. Why are some reasons that Jesus might use to go to the game, to sit down and watch it with you. It is, number one, it is a cultural monolith. It is something that everybody at least understands. So Sunday morning comes around, how often do preachers use sports metaphors as they're trying to explain spiritual concepts? You can't do that unless you are familiar with that cultural monolith. If I'm going to say, like, dude comes up into the batter box and hits a touchdown, everyone's going to think I'm an idiot, and they're going to discredit whatever spiritual insight I'm trying to draw out of that. If I'm talking football, I need to know what football is, because it's going to be an easy kind of a fast track to get that information into my hearers that they'll understand. So Jesus did this in the Sermon on the Mount. Through all of his messages, I'm the good shepherd. I'm the light of the world. I'm the salt. Like, you're the light. You're the salt. No one puts a lamp under a basket, but he lets it shine forth and from an elevated position. Like, when he's saying these things, he's like, oh, okay. Like, people are listening, and they're like, maybe they don't understand the full scope of the spiritual aspects of these things, but it's something that would stick with them, something that would help them learn later when the Holy Spirit is jogging that stuff to their mind. And you can't have that familiarity unless you're consuming at least a portion of that on a regular basis. Number 2 reason, people. Jesus loved people. And you can't love people without caring about the things they care about. In the same way that people have embedded their identity as with a sports team. I'm a Bengals fan. I'm a Titans fan. I'm a Cubs fan, especially now that they won the World Series a couple years ago. So, Jesus loved people. He cared about people. And so the people he cared about, he would care about the things they care about as well. So why is he talking about sheep to shepherd? You could easily say either one of those people, like, neither one of them would have been acceptable by a religious Pharisaical person. But Jesus is like, listen, my son came to the earth. You people, you're looking at it you're looking for the signs of it. Here's the one. We saw his star in the sky. So that's the number 2 reason. He loved people, and so he was willing to meet them where they were at and the things that they cared about. He wasn't ashamed of the things that maybe we'd be ashamed of about it. And then number 3, he lived. He was alive as a person. And so he loved things that I think that would shock a lot of us. Like, for instance, for some of you out there, you're trying to make Jesus' miracle of water into wine into water into grape juice. Because you can't handle the thought that Jesus would have endorsed or condoned the consumption of alcohol, because you have a different kind of idol in your life. And so if you have anything in your life that you would say that makes, or a belief in your heart that makes Jesus seem sinful, it's not him that's wrong. Let me say it like that. It's not him that's wrong. It's you that's wrong. You're the one that needs to change. So it's like, that's kind of my case versus case by case basis of why he would, why he wouldn't. So let's get to the verse.
What did you think they were going to say? Thank you? Yes. What the hell for? Who told? For knowing.
So let's see our verdict. For me personally, this is my opinion about the thing. I think reserving the right to change my opinion at any time, I think that Jesus would be willing to sit down and watch the game with you. I think that he might even be willing to go to a game with you. because this is, like I said, cultural monolith that is embedded in our culture. He was not afraid of those kind of things. He wasn't even he was not even afraid of using a terrible example to explain a spiritual truth. He does this with the unjust judge. He does this with the parable of the unjust steward, or the shrewd steward. Some people use different headings on it. Or the Pharisees themselves. Like, listen, they sit in the seat of Moses, so you need to do what they say, but don't do the things that they do. Like, he was not afraid of using a foil, essentially. He wasn't afraid to use a bad example to teach a spiritual truth. And I think that we shouldn't be afraid of that either. Because you kind of need both. You gotta have both sides. You gotta have a curb on both sides of the road in order to keep going straight. So that's one thing. Lecrae has a line in one of his songs that, like, a crooked stick can draw a straight line. So I don't think that he would be as freaked out about this stuff as we want to get. So that's my opinion. If you have an opinion about it, great. I would love to know it. If you think that no, it's idolatrous, or if you're out there saying no, don't watch the NFL because Colin Kaepernick are kneeling in the anthem, I have a whole separate conversation to have with you. But I think I've rambled enough about this for a decade, and if you have other thoughts, feel free to share them with me. Share my thoughts with somebody else if you think they might be able to benefit from it. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of content, and I'll see you out there. And here this next week, I'll be in California, so enjoy your sports if you love them. If you don't like them, great. Just don't be crazy about it.